Welcome back to part 2 of assignment 5. The first thing I want to do is make sure that we cover that very last part from the last video. If we open up this select page and we go all the way to the bottom and make sure that you got this last line in, MySQL free result, and all that does is clean up a little bit and release those results. The next thing I'd like for you to do is actually try to validate the page that you've created. So far we've done the index page and we've done the select page that look like this. And in order to validate this in HTML5, what I would suggest using is a tool called Total Validator. You'll have to Google for this. So if we look at Google and go to Total Validator, you'll find yourself at totalvalidator.com, and then from here you can download the validation tool for the platform that you are using. So if we come back, I already have it downloaded and installed. When it loads, it should look something similar to this. You're going to put your URL in here. Notice that it is the URL. It cannot be a local file. It's got to be on a web server. You're going to choose XHTML5, and you can see what I've got selected here. So I've already input my first page, index.php, and I'm going to click Validate. That's going to pop up a window. It says Total Errors Found 3, and it says they're link errors, and if I scroll down it highlights what they are, and this makes sense because we have not created these pages yet. So I'm okay with those. I'm okay with those errors. If I come back to Total Validator once again, I'm going to change this index.php to select.php, which is the other page we created, and I'm going to hit Validate again. I get a new page, and again I've got 3 link errors, and it's the same thing. So I'm okay with those. Those will go away in time, and we'll come back and we'll check that later. For right now, we want to look at creating this insert page in this video. So you remember from assignment 3 we created a form. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal this index.php from here, and I'm going to put it into my assignment 5 folder. I'll rename it. So I've got assignment 3 open right now, and I'm going to cut it out of there, and I'm going to put it into my assignment 5 folder, and I'm going to rename it insert.php. So now I've got that in my folder. I'll come back to Dreamweaver and I'll look only at assignment 5, and let's do a refresh, and now I see that I've got insert.php there as well. Now we don't necessarily need everything that is in this file because if you remember, that was a pretty large form, and for inserting we only need 3 form fields. So we're going to modify this some to meet what we need. The first thing we're going to do is at the top we're going to add that session start once again, because we are going to be using session variables in this assignment. So that first line needs to be session start, and you remember that session start has to come before anything gets written to the browser, so it's got to be before this echo. Next, we're also going to start using the session variable. So in here we're going to check for an empty session, and it's going to be a simple if statement that's going to check and see if a session variable is empty. So I'll do $_session, and what we are going to call it is error message. So if error message is empty, the first thing we're going to do is set oops, session error message equal to the empty string. Now what that does for us is it's a boundary case. It's a first use case. So later on this page we're going to try and use session error message, but if we have never used it before, it will throw an error when we try to write it out. So what we're doing at the top is checking to see if it does not exist. The if empty is basically looking to see if it does not exist, then set it equal to the empty string. So at least now it exists even though there's not actually something in it. That's going to prevent our error message down below. As we come down here, we're not going to need quite all of this CSS, but first let's come down to the form field and let's modify this some. We're going to look at this being assignment 5. And this is going to be the insert page. We'll keep this form ID equals 0, post. We're going to change the field set. We're going to keep the legend. We're going to keep the UL. We only need 5 LIs. So in this 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to get rid of that. We don't need the second field set, so I'm going to delete this. And so we've shrunk it down quite a bit already. And actually, what we do need a submit button. So I'm going to steal this input here, and I'm going to cut it out of there. And inside of this last LI, inside of that last LI is where I'm going to put that submit button, so I can then get rid of this last field set. So we've just got one form, one field set. It has one legend. We don't need this ID equals billing. You could give it a different ID if you want to, but there's only one field set, so we don't have to worry about it. Now let's look at the form as a whole. Let's make the form correct. ID equals form 0, that's fine. Method equals post, that is fine. Action is where we send the data. So where is this? What page is this data going to? And it's going to go to a page called doInsert, because this is insert.php. We're going to send this data to doInsert.php to actually perform the function. Now let's look at our variables. Down here we've got labels. Remember, a label is what goes in front of a form field to help describe the form field. And what we're going to have is we need shipper ID, company name, and phone number. So the black ones here are what actually appear on the page. So I'm going to change this to shipper ID, the next one to company name, and I'll make that 2 words just because that is what appears on the page. And this one is going to be phone, and I'll put phone number like this. And this fourth one here is actually where we're going to use our error message. So what I'm going to do is just delete what's in that fourth one. So we've got 3 form fields and a submit button. Now the title equals and the for equals are not correct in here, so we need to change those. The title is going to be shipper ID, and the for is going to be shipper ID. Now I put an uppercase S in this one and a lowercase s in this one. Title is when you mouse over. When you mouse over the word, it'll give you that little pop-up tooltip, and so that's why I put a capital S there, so it looks nicer. I'll put company name and phone, and then with lowercase starting letters I'll do these. So the for equal, remember, points to what the ID of the input is. So we've got to go to the right and change the name and IDs that are on the right here. So the name and ID are both going to be the same as what the for equals. So I'm just going to copy this, change the ID, change the, oops, sorry about that. change the name. I'm going to take the 4 equals out of this one, change the ID, change the name. I'm going to take the 4 equals out of this one and change the ID, change the name. Now let's look at the rest of this and make sure we don't have anything else that we want to change to match what we are doing for this assignment. I realize we could have typed all of this out, but for the most part we had done this already. So I thought it would be easier to just copy and paste and then edit what we need to for this. This first one, shipper ID, is going to be size 20 with a max length of 3. So we're only going to allow 3 digits to be entered, even though the size is way bigger than we need. That's more for visual appeal. The next one's going to be 20 and 20. And the next one's going to also be 20 and 20. So that's just going to make our fields the same size when they appear, so they look nice on the screen. This one, the value that we want to have there is going to be insert info. So after we've typed something in here, we'll click a button that says insert info. The rest of this is fine. We could leave that alone. But let's look at the JavaScript down below. It is setting the focus. If you remember doing that, we want to set the focus into the first form field on the page. The first form field on the page has an ID of shipper ID. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to replace this here with shipper ID. And that will set the focus into that first form field on the page. Now to make this match, we'll come back to the session variable. To make this match our other page a little better, let me look at my files. I'll open up the select page, and I want to grab from open body through that div. So I'm going to copy that, come over to insert, I'm going to find open body, and through that H1, and I'm going to replace it with this. Now this particular page does not access a database, so we do not need this line on this page. We do, however, need the menu, and this is the insert page, so I'll change that word there. But that gets our formatting to match up there a little bit. And up here we want it to say the same thing in the title, so I'll go ahead and change that. Next we're going to look at this CSS. We'll have a couple of, I think up here at the top we've got one that we need to add, and we're going to do CSS for the form. And the form is going to have a width of 400 pixels, and we're going to set a margin on it of 0 pixels space automatic. The UL with the list style of none and margin top of 5 we just leave alone. Let's look at that third one there. ULLI with display block, float left, width 100, height 1. That's fine, we'll leave it alone. Let's look at the label. We've got float left, padding. The solution takes out the color, so I'm gonna go ahead and take that out so we match the solution files that you have there. There's not a text area, so we can get rid of this right here. So we're going to have ULLI input there, and for the input we've got float right, margin right of 10, we've got a border of 1 pixel solid, we've got padding of 3 pixels. Let's scroll to the right, we're still on this line right here, and the solution has a width of 240 pixels. So I'm going to take out this font family, and I'm going to change this width from a percentage to 240 pixels, and that's going to fix the input there. Now once again, there's not a text area, so we're going to get rid of this, delete it out of there. The rest of that focus is fine. We'll leave that alone. I think we actually, in the solution, we changed the color a little bit, so we can match that, I guess. The field set is going to stay the same except for the color. The color is going to go to black. And the legend stays the same except for the color. Again, the color is going to go to black, so it's all zeros there. The label span is fine. These bottom ones we don't need, so we're going to delete those out. And then there's a couple that the solution has that are not in there. So after the label, we're going to do a UL and LI span. So there'll be another place where there's a span on the page, and we're going to set the color again to red. And we're going to set the font weight to bold. And this particular one, this one is for the session variable, and this span down here is still for that asterisk that's there. Now I believe there's one more, an input submit, so it shows up right here. So we're going to do input pound submit. So we're going to have to check that ID and make sure that it's correct, and it's simply going to be a width, oops, of 248 pixels. Now let's jump down there and make sure that our submit button has the ID of submit, and it does not. So I'm going to go ahead and change both the ID and the name to submit so that it matches that above. That should take care of our CSS on the page. We've really only got one thing left to do in order to finish this out, and that is to finish out using the session variable. Now if there's a session variable, we want to write it out right here. We're going to put it inside of a span because we just did some CSS for that, and inside of that span we're going to echo out the session variable. And the name of it, as you remember, error message. So we have the if statement above, so that if error message has never been used before, we don't want this line to throw an error, so we put in that if statement to set it equal to the empty string. Now we only want to write the error out one time, so down here we're going to add a little PHP so that it will write out a session error message if there is one, and after it's written out we will clear it. And that should finish our page for us. It's time for us to go and look at it. So here's our assignment, and here's our insert page that I just clicked on, insert.php. We've got shipper ID, company name, and phone, and we've got it laid out the way we want it. Actually, it looks like I've got one thing I need to correct right here. So let's come back to Dreamweaver, and instead of billing information there, let's put insert into the shipper table. Save that, come back and refresh this, and there we go. Insert into the shipper table. We've got our focus going in the right spot. So now what we want to look at is the doInsert page. We'll come back to Dreamweaver and create a new page. New PHP. Doesn't really matter about anything else because you're going to do a Control-A and delete everything that's in there. Now, let's go ahead and save this. And we'll put it in our Assign05 folder, and this is going to be called doInsert.php. look over here, we can see our files are in there. We've still got our includes. So we're going to use those includes. This page will connect to a database. So to start, the entire page is PHP. So let's start with putting our PHP delimiters in there. Much like we've done on the other pages, the first line that's there needs to be session start. And really, to this point, the only session variable we've been using is error message, which we are going to use once again in this file. So on that previous page, insert, I'm going to go ahead and close that one. So on this previous page, I have 3 form elements. Let's scroll over here to the right. We'll look at the inputs. So I have 3 form elements. The name is what you want to look at, because name equals this is what gets sent to the next page. So if I call this shipper ID 2, then on the next page I would need to have the 2 there, but I don't have that. So the name equals, name equals, name equals. That's what we're concerned with. And the reason I have you put the exact same thing for both name and ID is so that it does not get as confusing. So we need shipper ID, company name, and phone. We need to grab that data. It was posted. The way that we would grab it is like this, and we need some variables. So we'll do $, shipper ID is equal to the posted variable shipper ID, and it'll help if I spell it correctly. We'll do $, company name is equal to the posted variable company name. You'll remember that they started with lowercase letters on the insert page, and the last one, $ phone, is equal to the posted variable phone. So that's going to grab the data from the previous page, which in many cases would be enough, but we are going to add something to help prevent against attacks on our page. So there are ways when you allow people to type things into boxes, it is possible to type certain things that would mess up your site and potentially harm your database. And some of those things are called SQL injection. And a way that we have to combat against that is using something called add slashes. So for each of these next two, the shipper ID we'll leave alone, but for these we're going to do add slashes like this, and we're just going to take this variable that we're pulling from the previous page and we're going to pass it into add slashes. So what that does is escape special characters such as an apostrophe or any of the other special characters that are on your keyboard. So we're going to do that same thing again. We're going to pass the phone number into the add slashes built-in function in PHP. Now that we have gathered the information from the previous page, what we need is a couple of checks to make sure that those variables are not empty and that they actually contain the data that we want it to contain. So we're going to start with an if statement, and inside of that if statement we're going to check and make sure that all 3 of those actually contain something. So what I'm going to do is inside of here I'm going to do some groupings. So if whatever's inside of that is true or is not true, that or that. So I've just kind of divided things up. And now in this first one, it's going to be shipper ID. If it is equal to the empty string, or if company name is equal to the empty string, or if phone is equal to the empty string. So if any of those are true, we want to do what? We don't want to continue processing, so we're going to make use of the error message that we're storing in the session. So let's do a $_session error message. We want to set that equal to something. So the message that I'm going to put in there is, you must enter a value for all boxes. Now that's not enough. We need to actually stop processing on this page. So we want to redirect. And we'll do header, location, and where do we want to send them? We want to send them back to the page they just came from, insert. And I'll put an exit after that just to make sure that processing actually stops. So that's going to check to make sure that the values are not empty. We're going to have an else if. Inside of the else if, the shipper ID needs to be numeric. It can't, for this example to work, it has to be a number of some kind. And so PHP has a built-in function to allow us to check that. So we're going to say is_numeric. And we're going to pass it the shipper ID. So if it is numeric, then we don't want to do anything. It should be numeric. So what we want to do is, in front of that, put an exclamation point and make it if not numeric, then do something. And we want to do the same thing that we did up here. We're going to give a slightly different error message. It will say you must enter a number for shipper ID. The header location redirect will be the same. We'll go back to that insert page, which is where they just came from, and we'll have that exit just to make sure that processing does indeed stop after that. And we're going to have a final else after this, and the else is if everything is okay. So if everything is okay, then I want to make sure that the error message is cleared out. We don't want to have one of those error messages floating around if everything is okay. So if everything checks out, we're going to clear it, set it equal to the empty string. Notice there's not an exit after this one because we want to keep on going if that's the case. And then up here I'll just add the comment like I did on the other one. Make sure the shipper ID is a number so that it works below. At this point I'd like to go ahead and open and close the database connections. Add some space here, and so we need those include statements in here. So I'll do include, and we want to point to the open database connection, so includes folder, so we list the folder name / open dbcon.php, and I want to also go ahead and do the one to close it, and this time I'll actually remember to change this to close dbcon. And I'll go ahead and do the last piece that's going to be on this page, which is a redirect back to where we want to be. So we want to see the changes take effect. Therefore, the place we want to redirect to is the select page that shows the changes. So we'll do a header, location, redirect back to select.php, and I'll put an exit after that to ensure that we stop processing. What's left to do is insert the information into the database. In order to insert into the database, we need to ensure that what we are trying to insert in does not already exist in the database. So the way that we do that is by selecting from the database the ID to see if it's in there. And if it is, then we redirect back with an error message. So in between these include statements, we are going to have a SQL statement, and it's going to be a select to start us off. So I know that we're working on the insert page, but we've got to select to find out if it's already in there before we do the insert. So we have select shipper ID from shippers lab 5, and I think that's a lowercase s and a lowercase l if I remember right, where shipper ID is equal to some value. Now that is stored in the database as a number of some kind, so we don't need quotation marks around it, but we're going to concatenate on to the end of that shipper ID. Now to check that, we can do an echo statement, echo $SQL, semicolon. We can save this, and if I'm going to write it out, I've got to comment out this line. If I leave that line, then we'll never see what's written to the browser. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to come back here to my insert page, and I'll go ahead and refresh it. So it's been a little bit since we've been there. So I'm going to put shipper ID of 2, which we know is already in there, and then I'm just going to put some garbage for the rest. So you can see we land on doInsert here. We land on doInsert.php, and it echoes out the SQL statement for us, and that looks correct. So I'm going to continue on. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out because we've checked it, so I don't really need it now. After that select statement, it's going to be the same things that we've had on other pages. I'm going to open select.php, and we need this right here. We need the result equals and then the if-else check. So I'm just going to copy those lines out of select.php, and I'm going to paste them in after the SQL equals on this one. And what that does for us is execute the SQL query against the database, and we get the result back. We check to see if the result is empty. If it is, we set num results equal to 0, and that is what we are looking for. This is what we are hoping for on this particular page. Now the next part is another if statement. So we start a new if statement, and we want to check and see if num results is not equal to 0. If it is not equal to 0, then we have a problem, right? If it's not equal to 0, then that shipper ID already exists in the database. So this is another catch, just like these up here. And I'm just going to copy one of these error message pieces and paste it down below, but our error message is going to change to the shipper ID you entered already exists. And once again, it's going to redirect back to insert.php, and I've got an exit there just to ensure that we end processing on this page. But it's going to be an if-else, so I'm going to have an else there. And the only thing that goes in the else is clear the error message. So we're just going to set it equal to the empty string. So this little piece from here to here, we check to see, was there a record already in the database? If there was, set the error message and redirect. If there's not, let's keep going. So now below here, we are finally ready to make our insert statement. So we do $SQL. Once again, we can reuse that variable. And this one's going to be insert into Shippers Lab 5. We need to list the columns inside of those parentheses, the keyword values, and that is what the base of what we're going to have. So I need to list the columns. The columns are shipper ID, company name, and phone, like that. And then I need to insert values. Now if you remember, the first one, shipper ID, the first one in the database is stored as a number or an integer. And the other two are stored as text. So in between these parentheses here, we are going to place, I'm going to divide the space up. So I've got a space, a comma, a space, a comma, a space. So there's three things that need to go in there. And before this first comma needs to be just the shipper ID. And so in order to put the shipper ID in there, the best way that I think for you to learn how to concatenate in the variable is to do double quote, period, period, and then the variable name. So where you want to concatenate in, that's where you list things. But I've still got two more pieces to add in there, and those two pieces are alphanumeric. So we need single quotes around those two pieces. Now, I'll put my cursor in between the single quotes, and I need to concatenate in those variables. So where the cursor is, double quote, in between the double quotes, period, period, in between the periods, company name, the name of the variable. We'll do it one last time. Where the cursor is, in between the single quotes, double quote, in between the double quotes, period, period, and in between there, the variable name. And that concatenates all of our values into this statement. Now, as you can imagine, there could easily be an error in that. So what we want to do is write that out. Let's write out that SQL statement and see what it looks like. So I'm going to save that and come back here, and I'm just going to refresh this page, and I'll hit resend, and it looks like we got redirected back. So, oh, our check worked. So remember, we did the select statement. So I need to enter something that's not in the database, and then so this should work for us. So now I've got insert into table name, listed the column names, keyword values, and then I've got this goes into shipper ID, this in single quotes goes into company name, and this in single quotes goes into phone. So it looks like that is formulated just right. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that out because we don't need it. It's nice to know that our error message is working and our catch is working there. And now what we need to do is execute that insert statement against the database. And we use this same line right here, result equals MySQL query. So I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to put it right below the insert statement. That will execute it. And you'll remember that I commented this line out so that it wouldn't redirect. I'm going to take the comments off of that. I'll hit save. I'll come back over here. And now we need to, I'm going to come back to the insert page. We also need to look at our database. Well, actually, no we don't. Let's come here. So 2 is already in there. So if I try to insert it, it's going to look at 2. It looks at the database and says, hey, that's already in there. Let's use 4. And it went through doInsert. It successfully inserted it into these values and worked great for us. If we come back here, and for shipper ID, if I enter something other than a number, and I click Insert Info, we get you must enter a number for shipper ID. If I leave these fields blank, I get you must enter a value for all boxes. So our error message is working the way that we'd like it to work. And that will complete our insert and doInsert section, and we'll do more in the next video.